Okay, hello. Today is Friday, February 13th. Happy Galentine's Day for those that celebrate it. This is episode 557 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast. Les just got very confused of what's Galentine's Day, by the way, if you're not watching on the show. He's mouthing, what? That is the day before Valentine's Day, Les, where gals get together and celebrate friendship and love. So happy Galentine's Day to our listeners. We're the podcast that gets you up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Jessica Jones, and I'm joined today by Advisory Board member Les Munson and Senior Fellows Morgan Vina and Matt Hayden. All right, folks. So this week, I wanted to find Les's favorite topic, sports diplomacy, but I could not find enough connection in the Winter Olympics to like espionage or surveillance other than the U.S. losing the gold in, I think it was ice dancing to the French. There wasn't much controversy so far. So instead, we're going to talk about Cuba. We're returning to the Western Hemisphere, our favorite topic here on Fault Lines. In the last few weeks, the White House has declared a national emergency over Cuba. It's threatened tariffs on any country that supplies Cuba with oil and openly framed Havana as a hub for Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and terrorist-linked activities. Of course, the island is also just 90 miles off U.S. shores. Cuba has remained a constant in U.S. presidency's focus, from the Cuban Revolution to the Bay of Pigs. The island has, the Castro regime has survived isolation, sanctions, leadership transitions, and is continued right now into the present day. But things might be a little different right now. The U.S., of course, has had operations in Venezuela. The Trump administration and the Dunroe Doctrine, as we call it, has been focused here on the Western Hem and security closer to the U.S. With Venezuelan oil now cut off, Mexico under a bit of a pressure, and Russia and China as well kind of weighing how much they are willing to risk to support Cuba, things may look different than they have in previous decades, and pressure may actually result in some watershed change. What that is, not sure. So I want to turn to the team here to talk about this island so close to home. Morgan, I'm going to start with you. Why Cuba? Why now? What is the end game here for the Trump administration?
Well, Jess, I think you're right to say that Cuba has vexed U.S. presidents for around 67 years, right? And we've got 2 to 3 million Cubans that fled Cuba and settled in the United States. They are a very robust part of the American fabric. Obviously, Marco Rubio is from Florida. It's where many Cubans have settled. You've also got other members of high-profile members of Congress like Mario Diaz-Balart and Carlos Jimenez, who are also Cuban Americans and reside in Florida. So they make up a significant part of the constituency down there. Cuba is not the Cuba problem, so to speak. I think is very much thought of as a hangover from the Cold War. It is an ideological struggle in many ways. And so Marco Rubio, clearly, this is his opportunity to avenge his forefathers. He has made no secret of the fact that he would like to see regime change in Cuba, and rightfully so. It's a totalitarian regime that has oppressed its people, since the revolution, and quite frankly, the economy has been completely decimated, not because of the U.S. embargo, but because of the regime itself, right? I think Matt's going to get into the security situation later, but so I'll let him do that. But bottom line, Cuba is no friend of the United States, whether that is in a diplomatic or in a security posture. They do present a number of challenges to U.S. national security interests. With that said, I think core U.S. interests in economic interests in Cuba are limited, right? They had a very robust sugarcane population, which is basically non-existent right now. The economy is in complete shambles. And if we do see regime change, there's a lot to rebuild, right? With that said, Cuba is not Venezuela. There is no thriving opposition in place, right? The regime actually got rid of all of the troublemakers and those potential opposition forces that did have the means left the country a long time ago, right? And so there is no democratic leadership in waiting. With that said, I think there is an opportunity here for the administration to really flex. This is clearly an administration that is, Western Hemisphere oriented. Marco Rubio has his sights set on it. So there is a lot of political will. However, I think what we're going to have to see is, how will this eventually manifest itself? We are in talks with the Cuban regime right now. And frankly, they have said that they're open to these discussions. How far that will go, I think time will tell. But I am going to be bold and say we will see a new regime, or at least a new resetting of relations, shall we say, by the end of the year.
Matt, Morgan mentioned the security threats. The focus on Cuba started during the Cold War, ideological and security. What are the national security interests today for the U.S. when it comes to the island?
Well, you have leadership in Cuba that was basically holding an open house for the axis of evil. You would have Russia, China, Iranians, anyone who wanted to do the U.S. harm had safe harbor across the Cuban leadership, and so that led to adversaries that we have real concerns with setting up base across the Cuban infrastructure. That meant that you had signals intelligence, you had all kinds of intelligence operations taking place across Cuba against the Americans that included military interests as well as intelligence collection. So that from a national security perspective, we had similar challenges that we saw in Venezuela, where it just was a free-for-all for adversaries to just gain access and footholds in places that candidly were too close. And so with the waterway there, it really felt even a challenge because it was one boat away. And so we had a lot of interest in maintaining that security position as almost a perimeter of the United States itself. And so that was a must-have, and it's been one where to align with what Morgan was saying, that there's an economic collapse / free fall going on that can be taken advantage of to support regime change and/or just restructuring the relationship to where it's something we don't have to have these same concerns about.
And Matt, just a little further, what do you think about the pressure on, I would call Cuba's friends, right? You've Mexico, Russia, China. Are they going to have any friends left in the next couple of weeks?
So Russia and China have to really weigh, is this juice worth the squeeze? And right now they're showing that they don't have major action to jump and save the day for the Cubans. Mexico is weighing in with humanitarian aid. I think that may be seen as just that. They're not crossing the embargo lines as much as they're just making sure that there isn't a crisis. So I think we're going to see a bit of a stability as this starts to create more pressure for the Cubans in their decision making heading forward.
Les, you had a lot of spirit this morning. What are your I don't even need to prompt you, my friend. What are your feelings on what's going on?
My feelings? Let's talk about my feelings. First of all, I don't care about ice dancing. This is nonsense. It's la fraud or la corruption from the Olympic people. They're the worst. I don't know. We corrupt ourselves when we get involved in the Olympics, people. That's my position. On Cuba, which is really the topic today, Cuba, all joking aside, Cuba is bad news bears. These are this government in Havana is the worst of the worst. They have corrupted 5 official Americans to spy for them in the last 25 years, people from the State Department, from our intelligence community, and from the old USAID to actually work as traitors against the United States and for Cuba. Cuba is terrible. Matt is entirely correct. The Russians and the Chinese use it as a platform to undermine our national security. Yes, there is this link to Cuban Americans and domestic politics. That's not important. The important thing is Cuba is a threat to the United States. Good for the Trump administration for going into Venezuela and changing the government there in a way that is bad for Cuba and could really push them into a crisis. That's fantastic. What I think we ought to do, and Congress can play a role here, is make sure that we're using all of our tools to undermine, the remains of the Castro regime here. That means information. That means foreign assistance. We've really probably gone too far in undermining those programs here as part of the United States government. We need to fix that. Congress ought to demand accountability from the administration in this area. But overall, good for the Trump administration for going after the regime in Havana, which is long overdue, and really everyone should support this. And shame on anyone, whether they're Americans or anyone else around the world, who is somehow rooting for these guys or trying to provide succor for them as the pressure mounts. And I hope what Mexico is doing is just symbolic and not anything real. And I know there's complicated politics there, but Cuba's bad, and this regime does need to change. And in the grand scheme of things, that would be great for humanity.
Okay, well, even though Les kind of poo-pooed on the Olympics, I would like to end this note on the women's U.S. hockey team is playing in the quarterfinals against host country Italy. So not only did you get up to speed on Cuba-U.S. relations, you now know what to watch this weekend, a little women's hockey. Okay.
Hockey is a real sport. That's fine.
I knew you would like that one.
Ice dancing is not.
Something specific for you. Okay. I had to keep him happy, Morgan. Don't shake your head. We got to end on a good note.
Come at me, Morgan. Let's go. It's Fun Friday. Challenge me.
I don't have
Go
the
ahead.
energy. Look at that nod. All right. That's a wrap. Thanks so much to Kelly Crowley, Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, and NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us on Monday for another great episode of Fault Lines, NSI's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. We're on YouTube. Check us out there as you watch your Olympic highlights. And if you like what you heard, don't shake your head less. Heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.